Today, I am going to talk about this issue specifically focusing on museums. Well, because I work at a museum, for one thing, but also because I believe that museums have a very special role to play in this whole process. And I will start with my own journey, which is, something that I did not expect would look like that. I started learning about the so-called Russian avant-garde, which is a very, by the way, fraught term, I would say. It's kind of an umbrella term which we use when we talk about radical modern art produced in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, but not all of the works that we call Russian avant-garde are necessarily Russian or avant-garde. But I just use this term because it's recognizable and people are used to it. But I put it in quotation marks here. So I started to develop an interest in this wave of radical modernism in Russia in my university studies when I was at Moscow University. And I was, first of all, interested in color. I was really excited about all the new experimentation that these artists, such as Kazimir Malevich, Ivan Klyun, Alexander Rodchenko, Lyubov Popova, Olga Rozanova, and Vasily Kandinsky started to develop. And this was what interested me. I was not interested in fakes, forgeries, and so on. And frankly speaking, my education did not prepare me to really think that much about this. You see, the issue of forgeries and fakes is more of a practical issue that museum specialists, gallerists, or art dealers, or auction specialists, auction houses deal with. It's not something academics think about all the time. And so I was just doing my best trying to write a master's dissertation about this artist, Ivan Klyun, and his color experiments. So I went to Thessaloniki, Greece, where they have one of the best collections of his artworks, I would say the best, and also a large part of his personal archive. And so I was fascinated by these really innovative works, specifically red light spheric composition that you see here on the slide. It's really revolutionary, just a simple painting, red shape, red circle, but it's floating against the dark background, and it evokes these kind of spatial, cosmic associations decades before the Sputnik was launched into space, or the people stepped on the surface of the moon. So that is very exciting, and also one of the things that I loved about Klyun and still love is that he tried to find some connections between art and science. He was not a scientist, so he was often wrong about some scientific concepts, but the way he tried to address them in his art is quite amazing. And so, as I said, I was not planning to deal with any forgeries or fakes, but I very quickly I realized that I would have to develop some sort of an expertise just because of how fraught this field is. So I started by finding all the existing literature, all the scholarship that was published on this artist, Ivan Klyun, and there was only one monograph. Excuse me, only one big Russian language publication by Andrei Sarabyanov from 1999, which mostly included only Klün's texts, theoretical writings and memoirs and so on, and just one article about this artist. So not much was known. And in English, the literature was even more scarce. So I was very surprised to find out that there is a so-called monograph written by the granddaughter of the artist. Her name was Svetlana Soloveychik, but she published under Svetlana Klyunkova Soloveychik to indicate her relationship with the artist. And so this monograph was published in New York in 1994, and no single copy of this monograph was available in any Russian library. And I was in Russia at the time. And I was very surprised. How could it be that such a prominent artist, yes, understudied, but still prominent, has a monograph written about him by his granddaughter, but it's not available anywhere. No library acquired a copy. That was very strange. But I decided to order this monograph, of course, and I got it via the internet, and it arrived. And when I opened it, I was shocked. I was not just, surprised. I was deeply shocked because about 60 or 70% of all the images that I found there, and it consists mostly of images, there is very little text in there. Almost 70% of the images were completely unfamiliar to me. They were not from the collections that I knew, museum collections, very well-known paintings. They were new, and at first, my first reaction was, oh my God, I don't know anything about this artist. His work is very different from what I imagined, and how can I even be writing something about him if I don't know anything? And I was shocked, but then I started to search for more information about this monograph. There was almost nothing on the internet, but there was maybe one or two records on a forum where art collectors would discuss topics of their interest. And one or two of them mentioned that this monograph is unreliable, while others were quoting passages from it all the time. Then I went to talk to my colleagues at the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, which is, as you probably know, one of the main repositories of Russian art in Russia. I went to other colleagues from other museums, and it turned out that there is this unofficial knowledge and consensus among experts that this monograph is not to be trusted, even though it was published by the granddaughter of the artist. Shocking news for me, because in my ideal world, before that case, I believed that families of artists mostly try to fight for the legacy and help clear the market from fakes. But in this case, I was very surprised that such an important person in the family contributed to this process of distributing dubious works attributed to that artist. Moreover, it turned out that Klinkova-Soloveichik was issuing a lot of so-called authenticity certificates, where she would state that this or that painting or drawing came from his original collection. Well, Svetlana Klinkova-Soloveichik was only 5 years old when her grandfather died, so she did not really know him, nor did she have any art historical expertise or leave alone degree. She was not connected with art, and nevertheless, she continued to issue those certificates, even when she was shown really dubious artworks. So let's distance ourselves a little bit from that situation. I'm encountering this problem. I'm a young researcher who is just starting their path. Well, of course, the issue of forgeries is not unique to the to Russian art or to modern art. It's something very well known, and we know many. Actually, some of them are famous. We know many famous forgers. One of the remarkable cases is the time when the renowned sculptor Michelangelo tried to imitate an ancient Roman marble sculpture. So he quickly found out, and it was the time of the Renaissance, the time when everything ancient was considered very precious. So he found out that he could sell an ancient work for much more money than his own creation. So he created a sculpture depicting sleeping Cupid. And this sculpture became very, very famous. It was lost eventually, so we don't know where it is, if it still exists. These references here on the screen can tell you what it uh, looked like. Slightly on the left is an actual Roman sculpture. On the right is a painting that is believed to have a quote, a reference from Michelangelo's sculpture. So these things happen, and museums do organize exhibitions and publish research on dubious artworks or forgeries in their collections. One great example is the Courtauld Institute in London that organized this exhibition just last year or 2 years ago, Art and Artifice, Fakes from the Collection, where they focused on the old masters, specifically above all the Renaissance period. And here you can see a painting from their collection that was believed to be a Botticelli, ended up being a fake, a beautiful one, but a fake. So museums, as I said, museums do publish this research. They do um, uh, produce scholarship. But the issue with the avant-garde from the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union is unique in terms of the scale, the sheer scale and volume of the fakes produced, circulating on the market, and infiltrating museums, and museums spending decades and decades before they actually realize that something is wrong with those work, if they ever realize that. So when I'm talking about museums, I most of all, of course, mean museums from countries outside of Russia, just because there are fewer experts in Russian art outside of that country. But also, even in Russian museums, we encounter those problems. I am returning to my favorite subject here, Ivan Klun. So there are two paintings on the screen in front of you right now. One of them is an actual work by him that we have no doubts about whatsoever. It is 100% by him, which was proven by provenance, which is history of ownership of that painting, which was proven by art historical analysis. And the other painting here is very, very dubious, with no clear provenance. And frankly speaking, the art historical analysis, the visual analysis, also doesn't help in this case. It signifies that it signals that something is off. So I will reveal this now. The painting on the left is the original, the undoubtedly original painting by Klun, and the painting on the right is, I think, questionable, and many experts agree on this, but it is still in the collection of the Moscow Museum of Modern Art, and it can be accessed online, and not much research, at least to my knowledge, is being done on it in terms of proving or disproving its attribution. When you try to Google this particular artist, and I recommend you not to do so, but if you do, and if you search for images under the name of Ivan Klun, you will find this vast array, this diversity that pops up the moment you type in his name. But then when I look at them, what I see is a lot of questions. Only a few paintings on this in this Google search are really solid and don't raise any questions for me. This is his self-portrait. This very well known from the Tretyakov Gallery. This is another painting by him from the Tretyakov Gallery. Excellent history. Everything is proven. This is another painting. This is not by him. This is by Kazimir Malevich, by the way, but it just pops up because it's a portrait of Ivan Klun. And there are others. This is from a private collection sold on Sotheby's just a few years ago, but it has solid bulletproof provenance, and it's really been examined by multiple people, multiple experts. As for the others here, I have questions. As I said, some raise fewer questions in me. For example, those that I marked with black question marks, the composition from the Thyssen-Bornemisza Museum, the composition from the Museum of Modern Art in New York. But the others are completely strange, and there are many doubts about them. Returning to why these works appear in Google search. Well, first of all, museum works do appear in such searches, but the vast majority, as I found out, is actually works sold at auctions. And there are many auction houses, not only Sotheby's and Christie's, which are very well-known houses with global reputation, but there are also smaller auction houses and also websites that collect data about everything that was sold everywhere. And so these images can appear. And when I am talking about Sotheby's and Christie's, for example, this is the work that I mentioned that was sold just a few years ago for over $6 million. And as I said, it is bulletproof. It had an estimate of $2,500,000 at least. And then the price, the eventual price was much higher. So when we look at this painting, we also see many other paintings sold as works by Ivan Klun, which cost as little as $500. Some of them can be sold for $1,000 or $10,000, but even $100 is way too little for an authentic painting by Ivan Klun, which we know because of this example sold by Sotheby's. So what is happening here? Why are we seeing this situation? Why are there so many paintings, and who's buying them? Why do people buy paintings for $500? Do they believe that this is actually Ivan Klun? But for some reason, experts, all the connoisseurs on the art market overlooked such a masterpiece. And this buyer, with their discerning eye, found out the truth, and they will now make a fortune, and it will be a great investment. I don't know. Some of these people, I think, believe that they're buying genuine works and are hoping for a miracle. I don't know, maybe some other people buy those paintings just for decorative purposes, maybe not caring so much about their authenticity, but wanting to decorate their houses with them. The situation with so many dubious works on the market has very deep historical roots, of course, and it can be explained by the very specific situation that radical modern art produced in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union had to navigate in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and later on. So we're talking about the so-called avant-garde in the 1910s and 1920s, but as early as the early 1930s, these artists, and I'm talking about Malevich, again, Klun, Rodchenko, Kandinsky, and many others, their work was no longer welcome in Soviet museums. And even though you could see it on view in the 20s in museums, it was not accessible starting from the mid-30s to largely late 70s. You could not see it in the Tretyakov Gallery, in the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg. But what was happening with this art? It was not accessible because the government declared it bourgeois and formalist. Formalism was a big accusation. And all these works that by that time had already entered museum collections in the 20s, again, I'm showing you them here now, They were just placed in repositories. Before that, there were still attempts to show them critically, like here in this experimental Marxist exhibition at the Tretyakov Gallery in 1931, which shows them under the title Bourgeois Art in the Dead End of Formalism and Self-Denial. But then just a few years later, even such ways to demonstrate this art were no longer an option. And so these works were hidden. But just a few years into just some 10 or 15 years after the end of World War II, there was this sudden, or maybe not so sudden, start of very long-term wave of interest in radical modern art produced in the Russian Empire. It all started in the Soviet Union with articles by young art historians in the 60s who were publishing their first pieces of scholarship. And in the West, there was this art historian Camilla Gray, who published a very important book, The Russian Experiment in Art. It was published in 1962, and it still continues to be republished, even though it continues many factual mistakes and is considered outdated now, but it was a groundbreaking book at the time. And so this book popularized this legacy. Many collectors started to get interested in this art in the West, in Europe, in the United States. And the problem was that these paintings could not be as easily exported from the Soviet Union. Some of them were, of course, and we know of such examples, but it was not a thing you could export massively. And so there was lack of works on the market. The demand was very high, and the interest was getting stronger and stronger. And the other factor here is that there weren't many experts, there weren't many scholars who knew that much about this period, especially in the West, but even in the Soviet Union. And so these three factors, lack of artworks, lack of knowledge, but immense interest in them, produced these unique conditions when forgeries started to appear more and more and more. And the normal instruments that we have, the regular instruments that we have in museums or galleries to confront questionable works, they were not, first of all, they were not as developed back then. I'm talking about the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, but also they didn't really work with this material because whenever a work was smuggled out of the Soviet Union or somehow exported, and the new buyers in the West tried to find out more about its provenance, they often heard phrases like, "I can't tell you who owned this painting because this will put them in danger." And this was true in many cases, but it was also a great disguise for many fakes with imagined or forged provenances. And one such very scandalous a scandalous situation happened in 1990 when a whole collection of works, so-called Russian avant-garde works, was put on sale by Christie's in London. And these works were declared to come from the collection of Kurt Benedict, who was a German art dealer dealing with mostly Russian icons and antiquities in the 1920s. But he also organized the first exhibition of radical modern art from Russia in Germany. That was in 1922. And so the owners of the paintings claimed that they received them from Kurt Benedict himself, that Kurt Benedict amassed this collection in the 20s. Then, of course, the Nazi regime happened, right? The bombardment of Berlin, 1945, but they claimed that the paintings survived all these tragical events in those crates that you can see here on the screen. Well, you probably know about the destruction of multiple works of art in 1945, works by Rubens, Botticelli, Caravaggio, and other major artists were destroyed in the fires and were looted, and there were many, many circumstances, but miraculously, as the owners of the collection claimed, these paintings by Alexandra Exter, Rodchenko, and others survived. So this auction took place, and immediately many experts around the world started to talk about it. Only a few years later, there was an article that was published by one of the major newspapers specializing in art news, which explained the situation and investigated it, and came to the conclusion that the works from this collection are highly questionable. Some of these works are not only they not only originate from that collection, but also later in the years to come, on the market, one could see newer versions of these already questionable works appear on the market. And so now we're talking about a situation where we have dubious works produced or appearing on the market following examples of other dubious works. And this is a very alarming situation. One such case when we are dealing with a huge number of questionable artworks is almost the entire legacy of the artist Nina Kogan. And Nina Kogan was a real person. She studied in Moscow, first in St. Petersburg, then in Moscow, and then just after the October Revolution, she went to the city of Vitebsk in present-day Belarus, and there she joined the art school where that we know very well about because of other people who taught there, Mark Chagall, Kazimir Malevich. So she joined the art school, she became a follower of Kazimir Malevich, and she produced some number of works in the style of suprematism, the style that Malevich invented. But these works were not many, and her suprematist period ended very shortly, as early as 1922, when she left Vitebsk for Moscow, never to reunite with Malevich and his school. So that was a very short period, and Tatiana Goryacheva, art historian from the Tretyakov Gallery, a big specialist in Malevich and his school, is arguing that we know only about 4 or so original works in the suprematist style produced by Nina Kogan. You see 3 of them here. This is another one. They are all just designs for a suprematist ballet and a design for tram decorations. And again, they were all produced in 1920 or so and published in this issue of a journal prepared by Malevich and his students. In the later years, she returned to realist, or more or less realist style approach, and this is one of the book illustration projects that she completed in 1930. She was working on children's books and so on. As I said, never to return to suprematism again. However, when we search for her, online. And when we open catalogs of sales and exhibitions, we see hundreds of paintings and drawings published or sold under her name. All of them are highly dubious. As I said, there is only 4 artworks in the suprematist style that are undoubtedly by her, and none of them are in oil. They're just designs published, printed, and it is safe to assume that none or almost none of her oil paintings actually survived. Where this all is coming from is a big question. This became a very the subject of a very interesting poem by Clive James, who is writing about her work in a very ironic way. And I will just read it out loud because it's such a beautiful poem. 2 of her little pictures grace my walls. Suprematism in a special sense, with all the usual bits and pieces flying through space, but carrying a pastel-tinged delicacy to lighten the strict forms of that hard school and blow them all sky high, splinters and stoppers from the bombing of an angel's boudoir. When Malevich told his pupils that their personalities should be suppressed, the maestro little knew the state would soon require exactly that. But Nina, trying as she might, could not rein in her individuality, and so she made these things that I own now and gaze at, wondering at her sad fate. She could have got away, but wished instead her gift devoted to utopia. She painted trams, designed official posters, alive until the siege of Leningrad, and then gone. Given any luck, she starved, but the purges were still rolling, and I fear the NKVD had her on a list, and what she faced there at the very end was the white cold. Were there an afterlife, we might meet up, and I could tell her then. Her sumptuous fragments still went flying on in my last hours when I, in a warm house, lay on my couch to watch them coming close, her proofs that any vision of eternity is with us in the world and beautiful because a mind has found the way things fit purely by touch. That being said, however, I should record that out of any 5 pictures by Kogan, at least 6 are fakes. This is a perfect example of how one can fall in love with the aesthetic qualities of dubious artworks and appreciate the imagined stories behind them. We can see how he is referring to the NKVD, the purges, the siege of Leningrad, all those historical associations that we think about when we look at the avant-garde paintings and that make them more interesting and sometimes more valuable to us. And so it's a perfect example of how we sometimes appreciate those stories over the real stories, which may not be as obvious. It is not very fitting that such an artist as Nina Kogan, who followed Malevich in the early 20s, that she then abandoned this utopia, that she then turned to more down-to-earth artistic production. And this is uncomfortable truth, but it is very interesting how collectors and museum curators and just the public in general often fall for the more polished and more romantic stories. I promised to talk about museums more, and so in these last few minutes that we have, I will give you a few examples of how museums are approaching this issue. So some museums choose not to even engage as much with the issue of authenticity, and they choose not to verify provenances provided by the owners of those paintings that they're getting on loan or buying sometimes. And a great example of that is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Ghent, Belgium, that organized a reinstallation of their collection called From Bosch to Tumans, A Vivid Narrative. And inside that installation was a section devoted to modernism in Russia. all the paintings in that section came from one private collection owned by Igor Toporovsky, who was living in Belgium at the time, born in the Soviet Union, Soviet Ukraine, then lived in Russia for a while. And when these paintings appeared in this exhibition in the art newspaper, there was published a letter signed by multiple leading experts in the field, raising concerns about the authenticity of these works. And I'm talking not about the paintings only, but also about some works like the one you see on the left. Malevich never created or painted works that you see, like this distaff that you see here. They honestly even unthinkable, but they were exhibited without any context and explanation as to why the museum believes they are real and they are to be trusted. So it was a big scandal, and just a few months later, Catherine de Zegher, the director of the museum, lost her position. And 2 years later, Toporovsky was charged with fraud and imprisoned, and he is still persecuted by the Belgian law, as far as I know. Another more recent scandal I've been following is the exhibition organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Bucharest, Romania. It is showcasing paintings that are claimed to be by Kazimir Malevich, and they are accompanied by paintings by Romanian artists. One of the main voices and leading experts in the field, Konstantin Akinsha, raised concerns about the authenticity of these paintings, and also pointed out that some of the historical facts that the museum texts were bringing up were actually wrong. And so then the museum issued a statement saying that the exhibition is challenging cliches, and that they are wishing to distance themselves from the financial games that are ruling the art world of today. And they also claim that they don't have to operate within the same set of standards that are common in the former colonial West. I would say that it is maybe an overestimation to call contemporary global museum standards colonial, or coming from the colonial West. More of a rhetoric figure here, figure of speech, which doesn't exactly justify or free museums from checking provenances and doing their due diligence to consult experts. But again, every museum is kind of following their own guidelines, their own processes. Another interesting situation that is very different, but somewhat similar in this regard, is this wonderful curatorial experiment called Orphan Paintings, Unauthenticated Art of the Russian Avant-Garde, organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, Colorado, as early as 2010, which is very early because it was before many scandals broke out in this field. And so the story goes that the owner of this collection, Ron Pollard, and his brother and another friend started buying artworks on eBay, paintings that were sold by one seller from Germany, attributed to well-known artists like such as Malevich, Kandinsky, and so on. And they, as the owner said, they were absolutely beautiful and they were very cheap. So they were cheap. They cost only $100 each, a few $100 each. And so he amassed this collection of 180 paintings. And then there was trouble when he was trying to authenticate them and find proof in favor of their authenticity, or maybe dispute their authenticity. And they were shown in Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver as exactly orphan paintings, paintings we don't know about, paintings we don't believe are original, but we don't also believe they're not original. At least this is what the curator declared. And I think that it was a very interesting educational experiment about one's passion in collecting and about what it means to acquire a collection and then try to find out what it is. The authenticity of these paintings was never proven. And after 15 years, the owner is still organizing exhibitions from his collection, but it has not been recognized as a body of original works by the experts in the field. A great example of a situation when a museum um, also casts doubt on certain works in their collection and is showing them, but also is providing proof and going further and further and actually finding out about what they are, is an exhibition that was organized at the Rostov Kremlin in Russia in 2018, and it was ongoing for a few years, then it closed. Now, as I hear, it's still open. Tale of a Comet. And this was an exhibition of the museum's rich holdings of genuine Russian avant-garde works. But on top of that, they also discovered a few forgeries within their collection. One of them is a forgery that was created sometime in the 60s or 70s, probably. You can see it on the right. The painting on the left is an original from which this copy was created. Kazimir Malevich's Samovar. It is now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, but that painting was originally in Rostov. Then at some point, as the staff of the museum claimed, it was stolen from the museum, again, sometime in the 60s or 70s. And then in 1972, it appeared at an auction in the West. And so then MoMA acquired it, and now it is in their collection. And the museum in Rostov only discovered that they have a forgery just a few years ago. So this is a situation when they uncovered the truth and started talking about it out loud. Another wonderful example is the exhibition organized by the Ludwig Museum in Cologne, Germany, during the pandemic, unfortunately. So I wish I could have seen it, but I wasn't able to travel at the time. This was a very important exhibition accompanied by a catalog, which was the result of their examination of over 40 avant-garde paintings in their collection. And out of, I believe, 49 paintings that they examined overall, and they have much more, but they examined only that number because it requires a lot of resources. So they examined 49, and 22 ended up being very questionable, and they are no longer attributed to those artists who they were believed to be by. And they did all kinds of scientific and technological examination. So when we're talking about authenticating artworks, there are three methods that are available. One is, of course, visual analysis and art historical analysis. When we look at a painting and we are looking for similar or comparable examples or very different examples in an artist's oeuvre, and when we are trying to find out if the production of this work actually makes sense in terms of their entire life and legacy. The other method is provenance. provenance or the history of the painting, the artwork, where it was, when it was, how it moved from one collection to another. Those can tell you a lot, those facts. And then the third one is technological analysis, X-ray, radiocarbon dating, infrared, chemical analysis of paint pigments, and so on. And so the beautiful thing about both Rostov and Ludwig Museum exhibitions is that they examined their paintings using all the best, the help of all the best experts in the field and institutions in the field, and they came to very reliable conclusions based on multiple factors. At the same time, there is also a fourth method that is evolving, AI, and maybe in the future, artificial intelligence will be used as a fourth method that does not substitute the three others, but helps when we have disagreement and debates around certain objects. So as I mentioned, there are three steps, but most of all the art historians, art curators start with just art historical analysis and provenance research. And only then, when they have the funds, when they have the resources, they proceed to technological analysis. And I feel that sometimes we don't talk enough about this first, very preliminary stage of when we are conducting this purely archival art historical research. And I wanted to organize an exhibition that would open up those conversations and show the audiences that the research is going on, that the museums are actually trying to be open about these problems, and that there is a lot happening behind the scenes. So we organized this exhibition at the Amherst Center for Russian Culture, where I examined, with the help of external experts, art historians, works in our collection, just using provenance research and visual analysis. And some of the works were actually, they ended up being very unlikely to be by the artists they were believed to belong to, such as this formerly attributed to Alexander Rodchenko collage, or formerly attributed to Anna Kagan suprematist composition. Others actually ended up being original. And this is a wonderful example of such a drawing in our collection. Research into its history helped identify that it is indeed by Pavel Filonov. And some examples, this is the last example I will show to you, some examples are just very strange and perplexing. So these two drawings are still attributed to Ivan Kudryashov, but neither art historical analysis nor provenance research could say for sure whether it is by him. And another problem is that if we were to examine it using technological analysis, it would be really hard, because they are works on paper, and the analysis of works on paper, specifically when artists were using gouache or watercolor or pencil, are still, it is an area that is not as advanced as oil painting analysis. So that is something to do more research on. Questions still remain, but I hope that by being more open, and this seems to be the trend in museums that have Russian or Soviet collections of radical modernism, by being too open, we are helping the public and are contributing to the academic field. And this is a very important thing to talk about, and I hope that you have some questions for us to discuss. This is where my presentation ends. Feel free to ask me, and I will be happy to do my best. That's a great question. I think it does not necessarily diminish its importance. The importance is recognized globally, and we still have a large body of original works that are in museum collections that we can study, that we can exhibit. So no one is maybe, downgrading Malevich or Kandinsky just because there are many forgeries of their work. But the problem is that it does change the perception of certain artists, their legacies, and it does kind of it does influence research and exhibition processes badly, and the art market too, because collectors simply grew tired of this situation when don't know if they're investing their money into something that will give them more money in the future, or something that will just result in the loss of money. So because of the collectors, there is fewer works. There isn't as much research, not as many works are being acquired, or basically the market is suffering. And because the market is suffering, the museums are suffering too, because even though museums are not as active players in the field as individual collectors, still museums have acquisition budgets sometimes, and sometimes they also accept donations from individual collectors. And it is important that the market is more reliable than what we see. It becomes more reliable than what we see now. So yes, it is a problem. I hope it will change a little bit in the future, because all these scandals in newspapers seem to make museums more cautious and more willing to be more transparent about their holdings.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, we have a couple of just comments. One is from Ala, who thanks you for a great lecture, and also from Anthony, who believes that there is more food for study now. I'm curious. So we spoke about the so-called Russian avant-garde, and it seems to me, especially while I was listening to your lecture, it seemed to me that some genres, some forms of art are